This is the big debate that's going on at the moment around the world. It's basically between rewilding and putting animals back on the land. The most prominent people right now that are discussing it in whatever open public forum in front of everyone are George Monbiot and Alan Savory of the Savory Institute. George Monbiot is an environmental journalist for the longest time. I've read his stuff. I think he's a credible guy. I think he's genuine. I don't think he's trying to sell you anything. He's gone vegan. He's written a lot that I can get behind on the environmental side of things about rewilding. And then Alan Savory is a guy that's also been involved a lot in Africa, probably more than anywhere else. And he's basically been in charge of or been instrumental in shaping policy in Africa. And yeah, one shady part that I probably do need to mention is he did something. He was responsible for the culling of I think 40,000 elephants because he considered it a smart move to bring nature back into balance so that the people wouldn't starve there, right? So he's been responsible for that. He owns it. He'll tell you that in a presentation or wherever. Like, he's not ducking it. He'll say it head on. Right. So I, from what I've heard from both sides, I do respect them both. They finally came together and talked about the different aspects. So again, George Monbiot on the rewilding side, he wants to take animals off the land and let nature do its thing. Alan Savory on the other side argues that we need actually hundreds of thousands more cattle, sheep, that we need to graze to push back on desertification, say in Africa. There's which is supposed to lead to, it's happening right now, but it's also supposed to lead to 30 odd more million people having to flee their or to leave their homes and look for better places to live because they can't live off the land anymore. So they're both very passionate and yeah, they really are pushing their side. So it's interesting to see because and it's interesting to see how much policymakers are going to be inspired by them, because say Alan Savory is all about shaping policy, that we need policy to happen around the world, to have like solid structures in place and a solid plan in place, and not just let this kind of go, let's see where it goes kind of thing. And so policymakers around the world will be probably taking inspiration from this, if they're in that designation, right, in that department to do that. Yeah, and then the other conversation that's happening is on the science. So there's people arguing the science part, the scientific studies that are coming out, and then there's the policy side, which might get overlooked, but they both need to match, or they both need to align, so that if we can agree on the science part, that we shape the policy around it. The issue is one side will go for, say, that taking the animals off the land. That side dismisses regenerative farming, that it can't work, that the only way we can do this, which is it is very emissions based, right? It's about carbon emissions. It's or all the greenhouse gases, and reducing the emissions massively. And they argue that the advocates for it, they argue that it can only be done when the animals are taken off the land, and to replace meat with precision fermentation. Point I'd note is George Monbiot is vegan. He says he doesn't need meat, and he doesn't need, like, he's more than happy to not eat the vegan industry products, which to be honest, you can have them as a treat, but they should not be part of your staple diet. So fake meat shouldn't be eaten every day. It should be eaten as a treat, like a hamburger in a fast food joint. And so he doesn't believe that, or he doesn't eat meat, but he believes we can replace meat with precision fermentation, which, if I understand correctly, isn't it's not just fake meat. It's lab grown meat. So it's cellular organisms growing bigger, say like a steak in the a steak that's made in a lab. So that's his idea, and the advocates of the rewilding, like how do we shift away from meat production and move towards the rewilding side. And what he also says, which sticks with me so much, and I'll go into it later or in another post, he talks about the idea that factory farming is actually not as harmful as our extensive grass-based systems to raise cattle and sheep and everything else that grows, or hens, all of that stuff. So he's saying that factory farming is less harmful in emissions than our extensive farming practices outside. Yeah. And that amazes me, because one of the things the vegans probably one of their worst nightmares is that factory farming continues or grows or gets worse and crueler. And I will go into this in another post, but I think coming out with statements like that might lead to more factory farming, and I have stuff to back that up, because the advocates of factory farming saying that factory farming will save us from climate change, they'll use George Monbiot's glorious words and say, hey, look, even the environmentalists and the vegans agree that factory farming is the way forward. And I'll show you, like, Michael Schellenberger is one of those guys. He says, like, hey, turns out we just need nature to do its thing. Let nature do its thing. So we need to take the animals off the land, and then suggest that we put them in very much smaller, cramped conditions. He doesn't say cramped conditions. He just says put them in smaller spaces, so that we let nature do its thing. Which, it's never how that happens. Like, you don't just leave nature unless you designated a conservation area, especially in, say, a third world country. That place is going to be used for something else. Like, so basically, like, you send people off into the idea that factory farming is the way forward, then the land that's left over is just going to do its thing. He also adds that the what we'd call sweatshops over here are bringing people into the cities, so and empowering women and poorer people, so that you leave the land, just it'll just be there, won't have anything happen to it. But my point is, if you make that a conservation area, fine, then it will probably do something, unless it's really desertifying, and then it's bleak anyways. Like, it's just gonna die more. But if you Yeah, and there's the whole thing of biofuels. Yeah, they're going to be built. They're going to be grown in poor, more vulnerable countries, and they're already supposed to have been displacing people, and the food that they can grow locally, just for biofuels. So HVO fuel, like hydrogenated vegetable oil, can be used as a replacement in vehicles and heating, and brags that it's whatever 30% lower emissions. But the long term game is, where are you going to get the supply? Um, like if HVO fuel took off, or biofuels in general, um, and you get people hooked on the idea of biofuels, then you're going to be looking for somewhere to get the supply of biofuels. Where is it cheapest to produce? In the developing or third world countries. Um, so you're mixing it up in that way, that not you, but the mix up is that, say, Schellenberger would promote, um, he'd never say, oh yeah, we have to make the sweatshops more humane, still give them business, still buy our clothes from them, give them good business, but take care of them from the harm of chemicals that they use there in the creation as well, and want more humane working conditions. That's not what he says. He's like, just keep buying your fast fashion clothes, um, use factory farming to save the environment from climate change, or save us from climate change, and then let rewilding do its thing, because you're taking the animals off the land. So you're feeding right into, or George Monbiot is giving him a layup by say, like, the one of the most prominent environmental guys, who, again, I say I respect. I do. I think he's done great work. I've also seen him cry on TV. Like, I've seen him cry because he's that genuinely, deeply passionate, and also fearful, obviously, of what's happening in the world, and wants to change it. So I respect him, and I think he's a man of integrity. But I think he's actually given a Schellenberger, or whoever wants to advocate for factory farming, an absolute fucking layup, right? So that's the one side. Then you have Alan Savory on the other side, arguing for regenerative agriculture, put more animals on the land, that it helps to develop the topsoil, or redevelop the topsoil, regenerate the parts that are getting hit by desertification, or just in countries where it's not about desertification, but just to build back a depleted and degraded topsoil, by moving the animals around, and allowing, like, less chemicals, less everything, moving the animals around, and letting them poo and pee and everything else, trample in seeds, so that they regenerate the topsoil, and fertilize it themselves. It's all about how you move the animals around, and also what you feed them, and everything. Like, it's a big whole thing. It works. Now, what's very interesting is, both will argue that they have the science to back it up, right? They'll, like, George Monbiot will go, look, I'll change my mind if you can show me the science that will prove me wrong. Alan Savory will say, yeah, hey, look, I have lots of proof that your studies were too much of a narrow lens, and that cows and sheep and all the ruminants that graze on grass, outdoors, that they're part of a system, an ecosystem that's kept in balance, and that, say, your scientific studies are very narrowly on emissions. That's why they say it's reductive. It's too simple of a lens for a whole system that works together. Um, yeah, so they're back and forth, but this is a stalemate, right? It's like in chess where both sides don't they can't move any further, and there's already science to argue for both sides, right? So if you want to believe one, you can believe it. If you want to believe the other, you can believe it. And like they're not changing their minds. I admit I have a bias. I'm from a farming background. Both my uncles are farmers. My great grand my my grandfather and his brother had a butcher's, but it was more my grandfather's brother. But my grandfather worked there a lot. So yeah, and I have farmers on the other side as well in my background, and I eat meat. So yeah, I have a bias. Maybe I want to believe this, but I, in my bones, I know that we can do this in a proper way, um, where yeah, where we can farm in a good way, in a better way that is in harmony with the environment. And that doesn't mean that we all go vegan or, and no offense to vegans, I have nothing against you, really, nothing. I know people that have worked in large farms and that have gone vegan, because they've seen the cruelty that's happened to the animals. Um, yeah, one story I have of a friend. She was working on a large farm, and a calf had broken its leg. Yeah, calf had broken its leg. Bone had gone through the skin. A lot of blood coming out, and she said, "Hey, we either need to, like, ring a vet or put him down." And what did the fella in charge said? Let him out onto the mucky ground there. So the calf just walked out with the broken leg, and that's when she went vegan. I understand. Like, that's, I'm not here to defend the dark sides, and I do think that especially factory farming can be changed, changed for the better. uh, I'd love to say it could be abolished. I don't know if we can get that far, because we have such a love for very cheap protein, and we have, yeah, I mean, like, if you look at the numbers, like, factory farming of chicken is like, we're eating fivefold the chicken that we used to eat 50 years ago, say. And then we're eating, I one or the other, like, one's 3 times as much and the other is 5 times as much. So pork and chicken are the main factory farmed animals. Lamb, sheep, and cattle are the ones you can mostly get grass fed, say. Where was I? Yeah. Okay, so basically that's the debate. There's the two sides, and as I said, I would probably have a bias because I do eat meat and dairy, so I do like the idea of regenerative farming, and I don't trust that. Well, I don't want to see the world go towards just these it's not even that I care about the lab grown meats that much. If there's lab grown meats, fine. Precision fermentation, fine. I don't believe we should all be eating fake meat, which I'd distinguish between the two, because one is just like throwing a load of chemicals together, and products, and making something that tastes like meat, and even smoked meat, right? And the other one is actually growing like something from a cell, and then becoming a multicellular organism, and replicating exactly what piece of meat is like. Okay, if that's cheap and takes over the part that factory farming would normally have in its supermarkets, to be honest, I don't think that would be much unhealthier. And maybe it's even healthy, but I don't think that would be that bad, because factory farm meat is very unhealthy for us and everything around it. Yeah, and that's another thing that drives me insane. That yeah, we have climate change as an issue, but we have multiple issues with the environment that have not just to do with the with climate change, and antibiotic resistance is one of them. 75% or so of all antibiotics in the world are used in animal agriculture, mainly in factory farms, and that stuff goes into our water supply. It goes into the meat, which fair enough is debated if it actually goes to us. Also, helps it makes us build resistance to antibiotics. So if we go to, God forbid, we're sick and we're lying in a hospital bed and we have an infection, our doctor will prescribe us an antibiotic that mightn't work on us. Nowadays, they say that we have 50% of antibiotics aren't working on us. So we're developing these resistances to the different antibiotics, and we're going down the line to the antibiotics that were in our textbooks back in the day, that were actually the ones that they say these are ones that we use less of because they're not effective. Those ones are the ones we're going to now. There's no new antibiotics coming on the market, so we're down to our last ones, right? And then we're also creating superbugs with these antibiotics in factory farming, because the more we use them for routine dosing and growth promotion across the world, the more resistance these superbugs, or they eventually turn into superbugs, like they form and they spread, and eventually they can hit us if they cross from animals to humans, which has happened a few times already. So there's massive issues with that. And then you obviously have the contamination of these factory farms, all the pollution of fertilizer. Chemical fertilizer gets blamed a lot for algal blooms. The overgrowths that are happening in our rivers and streams and lakes. The big green gooey stuff, or the bluey green, that's the algae blooms, and they're created from like a type of fertilizer. It doesn't necessarily have to be the chemical fertilizers NPK, but it could be the manure from chicken farms that's been dumped into the rivers, in areas where there's like a high concentration of chicken farms. Yeah, that, I hope that made sense. So basically these factory farms are they're really not good for us, and they're also the ones that are eating the GMO crops, the genetically modified crops that we're talking about. So big picture, they're eating the stuff that the proponents of GMOs and pesticides and the fertilizers are pushing, right? So like, you can say it's perfect. Like, it's actually a perfect design system to keep us unhealthy, and like believing that technology is solving like fixing our problems by doing the GMO food, the fertilizers, the pesticides, and then feeding it to the factory farmed animals who are also being pumped full of antibiotics, and all of it's making us sick. And that's like the biggest industry in almost every country is the healthcare system. So that's where you make most money. And they're not only just doing it in their own countries. They're massive corporations that are all linked together, and in business they're all in bed together, or a lot of them are, in pockets, and they're doing their thing. So it's like, it's, if you saw it on a piece of paper, how they all feed into one another and how they all help, they all profit off us. And it's it's scary, because people like me before I understood it, are falling for it and thinking this is the only way forward. And that's scary, because it's like, if you haven't grasped how important this is, it's like, like even GMOs fell by the wayside for me. I was like, meh, whatever, I don't care, I'm not too interested in it, doesn't really matter. And then you see what they're doing, and even like how, like, just say if you have a regular farmer in a country that's pushing GMOs, which there are histories in different countries where this has happened, where just say normally what would happen in back in the day, historically, farmers would maybe swap seeds or whatever. They'd have like these long lasting seeds that would just replenish every year. Now we've moved towards annuals and biennials that promise a larger yield, so larger return, and then they die out after 1 or 2 years, and you have to buy new seeds. And if you're in a country, my father recalls Romania being one of these countries, but I could not find anything on it. I don't know. Maybe it's been destroyed. Maybe maybe his memory is not what it used to be. But apparently, the seed sellers were selling these seeds to farmers, and then once you're in that system, it's very hard to get out of it. So you will have to buy next year's ones and next year's ones, or every 2 years. And what they did was, with no protection, the state didn't protect them, and they jacked up the prices. So it was extortionate, basically, that the farmers would then have to keep buying more and more expensive seeds to grow crops and make a living. And there were stories of farmers committing suicide because they were totally like getting bankrupted by these extortionate companies who were coming in, and they were sold on the idea that they'll get way more money from a higher yield seed that will allow them to grow more crops, or feed their animals more, or whichever way you want to put it, or sell it. They bought into it, and then people ended up committing suicide about it, because that's how serious that was. And that's not even to do with the pesticides and the fertilizers and everything else in it. So like, it's so well thought out, and we're the ones that will all fall, or like, we will all pay for it if this narrative gets driven forward. Now, with the rewilding and the rewilding and put the animals back on the land argument, I think regenerative farming is the way forward and can feed the masses, and it's a more labor intensive way to farm, but it's like smarter farming with less chemicals, that replenishes the topsoil, as said before, and brings everything more into balance in the carbon cycle. Everything, even the water. Like, there's an argument about how much water cows use, but like the water they use, uh, especially in like water-rich countries, right, or water-rich areas, like Ireland, like a few places. I think New Zealand, um, South America, a few spots there, and a few parts of America, of course. They all use water, but that water isn't toxic afterwards. It's not. It goes back into a healthy soil, which is part of, call it ecosystem services. Like, our ecosystems clean our water and clean our air. Like, if they're healthy, that's what they do. So like, you're actually like, you're cleaning the water, or you're not polluting it with like organic or regenerative farming, right? It's just going back into the system. It doesn't need to be cleaned with um, massive purification stages to allow us to drink it again. So that's the normal, natural cycle. So like, when people say it's using up all this water, yeah, but it's coming out the other side, and it's also helping to to water the area, and keep it all in balance. Like, it's a system. Think about all the moving parts in this. So it's like, when you look at Cowspiracy, and he does this kind of like very simple maths about how much. I think I remember, like, it was one guy with a hose, putting water on his plants, and then the whole neighborhood fills up with water, and that's one cow kind of thing. That's It's too reductionist. It's too simple of a way to look at a big system and how it all works together. So like, if you had all of that working in regenerative or organic, I keep saying organic is basically just without chemicals, but it's the certification, it's a standard. Regenerative agriculture still has to find its feet, probably, in how it's shaped. And the beauty of it right now is that it's actually outside of a lot of state-led agricultural policy. So there might be beauty in it not finding its feet and staying outside of it, and not relying on grants to keep it going. Yeah, I'm not saying get rid of grants. Farmers need grants, and especially if farmers are expected to do rewilding, which is where I think, if you took, like, George Monbiot isn't wrong with the rewilding. Like, rewilding is definitely part of it, and that's a big thing as well. Like, people, like, just because I'm for regenerative farming doesn't mean that rewilding can't complement it. Like, rewilding, like, there's, back in the day, there farmers have been told all sorts of, been given orders, or they survive on the grants. So they will, if the state tells them, hey, take all the hedges out, put stone walls in, this is better and it's cleaner for the agricultural system that the state is envisioning for them, then they'll do it because they're relying on the grants. So for a long time, they were, say, the Irish state, they were told to drain the bogs. Now we're been told to re-wet the bogs. We were told the farmers would get growth promoter injections in the post to test out on their animals from the state, right? And however they're influenced by corporations or the EU or whatever. It's all over the world. It's the same thing. There's big corporate interests in the background. Not always, but a lot of it is that, a push from there, or to keep up with other economies. And one of the things that we're told as well was, like, the stone walls, get rid of all the wild that's around the stone walls or the hedges or whatever, disregarding or not even been aware of the idea that that's an ecological corridor for smaller animals to go through, to take shelter in. There's also rewilding for increased biodiversity. So like your native flora, your native your native plants that can grow there, and you can, for pollinators, for just soil health, for everything to keep it in balance. That can all be done together with regenerative farming. Like, they can be married together, but I wouldn't extremely say like take all the animals off the land and that's the answer. I don't think that's the answer. I don't think that they should not be living in sync. And like, I heard this before about the amount of buffalo that lived in America, like thousands and thousands and thousands on one patch, and it was filled, and it survived and thrived just fine. It's what we've done to nature that's made it so bad, but it's fine on its own. Like, like, not on its own. It's fine as long as we're not destroying it with chemicals. It's essentially, it's chemicals. That's at the end of it all. It's antibiotics are chemicals. Chemical fertilizers, the pesticides, it's all chemicals, and they're all yeah, they're the main reason pretty much for almost all our woes. And yeah, I don't know. I think there's a bright future for agriculture if we can go that way, the right way, and integrate some of the rewilding into the idea of the regenerative, which probably also has it integrated already. Yeah, it's an exciting future. In one way, a lot of people waking up. I'm repeating myself now. A lot of people waking up, and at the same time, there's a lot of people falling for the Bill Gates concept, which I don't believe in and I don't agree in, and I think it's doing more damage than it's doing good. So, it's like, time will tell how much this future will go in a good way or a bad way. And also, when people picture the future, I often think, what world are you picturing, or what's the future like to you? Because there's hell on earth right now in different places in the world, and where, like, if you're part of where I'm from, or from the Western world, or if you're lucky enough to be in a place that's stable right now, wow, brilliant. Like, there's so many places that are literally hell on earth, like the Congo, Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, all of these places are going shockingly bad. So, like, when we talk about the future is, like, on the grand scheme, there's going to be countries that do better than others, and there's going to be ones that are going to be able to protect themselves better, and there's going to be ones that fall for all of the stuff that's been pushed at them by big corporations to save the day, or they just don't, they allow the corporate capture is so strong that they can't get out of it. So when I think of future, I think of future per country and globally, like, statistically, how well is it going? 40 to 60% good to bad, kind of thing. So it could, like, unless we have global agreements that are like a blanket on everything, and we can kind of determine where the world is going with regenerative agriculture, with controlling the amount of chemicals that are produced, all of the issues that we have, AI, like keep going down the list. There's a million things we have to worry about, not just climate change. If we can figure out how to cooperate and agree on sensible things and not be influenced by ruthless corporations steering our narrative to profit off it and make us sick, well, then maybe our whole world future will go a good direction. But right now, we are more torn than ever before, and it's kind of like the world is splitting. Like, we're going away from globalization to bifurcation. We're dividing essentially into two, and with that comes less chance of cooperation and global agreements, right? Because people just step back. They're like, why would we bother agree with you? We're at war with you, or we're not in a hot war, but we're in a cold war, a trade war. We don't want to do business with you, and we actually want you to be pushed down, because we want to win economically and also in our influence in the world. So you're like, the future depends on us and how much we cooperate and how much we can push back on big corporations steering the narrative. And it's in your country, but it's also globally that how our future will look. So there's like multiple visions of the future you can have at the same time,